Rich young people humiliate elderly ice cream vendor, but didn't imagine who was watching. The midday sun beat down on the elegant square on Fifth Avenue in New York City. Mr. Anthony, at 68 years old, slowly pushed his handmade ice cream cart while wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief faded by time. The routine had been the same for over 15 years, ever since his pension as a public school teacher proved insufficient to support his home and the medications for Mrs. Helen, his wife. That Sunday afternoon, a group of 4 well-dressed young people approached Mr. Anthony's colorful cart. They were filming everything with their latest smartphones and laughing loudly while ordering ice cream. "Look, Instagram followers, we found a living relic, a street ice cream vendor in the 21st century," said one of them, pointing the camera at the tired face of the elderly man. What should have been a simple transaction quickly turned into a spectacle of humiliation. "Hey, Grandpa, how much for your little snow cone?" asked Henry, a 22-year-old heir to a construction company, while his friends laughed and continued filming. "They're not snow cones, son. They're artisanal ice creams made with fresh fruit. $15 each," replied Mr. Anthony with dignity, maintaining the upright posture that his years as a teacher had taught him. $15? Henry guffawed. "For that stuff you make in your garage? This must give people some serious food poisoning." The group of friends burst into laughter. Marianne, daughter of a famous telecommunications executive, took a $100 bill from her designer purse. "Here, old man, keep the change to buy some medicine," she said, deliberately throwing the bill on the ground. Mr. Anthony looked at the money on the ground, feeling a lump in his throat. In his almost 70 years of life, he had never imagined enduring such humiliation. With difficulty, he bent down to pick up the bill, but his painful knees protested, making him take longer than he would have liked. "Look at this, everyone. The dinosaur is having trouble bending down," mocked Tyler, another member of the group, as the scene was live-streamed to thousands of followers. What the young people didn't notice, however, was that a few feet away, sitting on one of the square's benches, Helen Montgomery was observing everything with attentive eyes. Behind her designer sunglasses and the discreet hat she wore to avoid being recognized, was one of the most powerful women in the country. Owner of a communication and technology empire valued in billions, Helen had a habit of walking incognito through the city on Sundays, her only moment of peace away from boardrooms. While the humiliation continued, Helen made a discreet signal to Charles, her driver and personal security, who was waiting a few feet away. The man immediately understood the message and, discreetly, began to film the scene with his cell phone. The young people, after making Mr. Anthony serve 4 different ice creams, began to complain about the flavor, throwing the contents on the ground. "This is garbage. How dare you sell something like this?" complained Luke, the 4th member of the group, spitting out the ice cream in an exaggerated manner. People passed by and observed the scene, some visibly uncomfortable, but no one intervened. The Spectacle Society functioned as a silent audience in the face of gratuitous cruelty. "Please, young people, if you don't like it, you don't need to. Buy more, but don't ruin my merchandise," asked Mr. Anthony with a calm but firm voice, reminiscent of his classroom days. "Look at that, guys, he still has the nerve to complain," said Henry, raising his voice to ensure everyone around could hear. "Do you know who you're talking to, old man? My father is August Williams, owner of Williams Construction. I could buy 100 carts like yours just to throw them in the trash." Helen slowly rose from her bench. There was something about the ice cream vendor's behavior that deeply touched her. The dignity with which he faced the situation, the way he maintained his posture despite the humiliation. He reminded her of her own father, who had been a street vendor before she built her empire. The young people, tired of their game after almost 20 minutes of humiliation, finally stopped filming. "Thanks for the entertainment, Grandpa. This video is going to blow up," said Marianne as the group walked away, laughing and checking their phones to see how many likes they had already received. Mr. Anthony took a deep breath, bent down with difficulty, and began to clean up the spilled ice cream on the ground. He didn't want to leave a mess in the square. He had always been a man of principles. "Let me help you," a firm female voice surprised the ice cream vendor. Looking up, he saw an elegant woman, approximately 50 years old, with a scarf on her head and dark sunglasses, bending down beside him with a handkerchief in her hand. "You don't need to trouble yourself, ma'am," replied Mr. Anthony, embarrassed. "It's no trouble at all," said Helen, helping him clean up the mess. When they finished, she asked, "Do you work here every day?" "Yes, ma'am. Every day from 10 in the morning until 6 in the evening. It supplements my pension." Helen nodded thoughtfully. She looked at the colorful cart with the name "The Professor's Delights" hand-painted on it. "You were a teacher?" "For 35 years, ma'am, mathematics in the public school system, but the pension isn't enough for my wife's medications." Helen smiled slightly. "I'd like to try one of your ice creams if you don't mind." "Of course, ma'am. Which flavor would you prefer?" "What do you recommend?" "The papaya with passion fruit is the most special. My late mother's recipe." Helen bought the ice cream, paid with a $50 bill, and refused the change. After tasting it, she smiled genuinely. "It's delicious. One of the best I've ever tasted." "Thank you, ma'am." Mr. Anthony smiled, genuinely happy for the sincere compliment. "Please call me Helen." She extended her hand in greeting. "And your name?" Anthony Ferguson." Helen nodded, memorizing the name, and politely said goodbye. As she walked away, she made a discreet signal to Charles, who quickly approached. "Find out everything about those young people. I want full names, addresses, information about their parents, everything. And I also want to know more about this Mr. Anthony. His story where he lives, about his sick wife. I want a complete report by tomorrow morning." "Yes, ma'am," replied Charles, efficient as always. Meanwhile, the video of the humiliation was already beginning to circulate on social media, receiving thousands of views. The comments were divided. Some condemned the young people's attitude, while others found humor in the prank. What no one knew was that that seemingly ordinary Sunday would mark the beginning of a story of redemption, revenge, and justice that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, in her mansion in Beverly Hills, Helen received the complete report on the young people from the video. Henry Williams, 22, was the only son of August Williams, owner of Williams Construction, one of the largest in the country. He was studying business administration at an elite private university, but was known for rarely showing up to classes. Marianne Turner, 21, daughter of Robert Turner, telecommunications tycoon and owner of Turnercom. She was studying fashion and was a digital influencer with more than 2 million followers. Luke Mitchell, 23, son of Senator Paul Mitchell, was studying law and already had his future secured in the family's law firm. And finally, Tyler Adams, 22, heir to a chain of private hospitals, was in his final year of medicine, although his professors reported that he showed little interest in the profession. They all had something in common. They were children of New York's business and political elite, frequented the same exclusive clubs, and shared a life of privilege without any sense of social responsibility. The report on Mr. Anthony was even more complete. Anthony Ferguson, 68, retired teacher after 35 years teaching mathematics in public schools in the Bronx. He had been widowed for 3 years, but the report had an error. His wife had not passed away, as he had mentioned to Helen. Mrs. Helen was alive but suffered from advanced stage Alzheimer's and lived in a modest nursing home. Mr. Anthony dedicated almost all his income to keeping his wife well cared for, while he himself lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in Queens. The ice cream vendor had started his business 15 years ago while he was still teaching to supplement his income. After retirement and with his wife's illness, the ice cream cart became his main source of livelihood. The report included testimonials from former students who spoke admiringly about the teacher who had changed their lives, teaching mathematics with passion in some of the poorest areas of the city. Helen finished reading everything with a lump in her throat. Mr. Anthony's story deeply touched her, not only because of the dignity with which he faced difficulties, but because he represented millions of elderly Americans who, after a lifetime of honest work, found themselves forced to continue working to survive. At that same moment, the humiliation video had spread even further, now reaching mainstream media. Television programs were beginning to report on the case, with indignant anchors commenting on the young people's lack of empathy and respect. Hashtags like #respect the ice cream man and "Our justice for Mr. Anthony" were gaining momentum on social media. The parents of the young people, alerted by the tsunami of criticism, were desperately trying to control the damage. Williams Construction issued an official statement dissociating the company from Henry's actions. Robert Turner, Marianne's father, forced his daughter to temporarily delete all her social media accounts. Senator Paul Mitchell claimed in an interview that his son Luke had made a youthful mistake and that the family had already contacted the ice cream vendor to apologize. The Adams family, more discreet, opted for silence but quickly hired a crisis management agency. Meanwhile, in his small apartment, Mr. Anthony was astonished at the case's repercussions on the small television in his living room. He didn't understand how that video had gone so far. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists wanting interviews, former students offering support, and even lawyers suggesting lawsuits against the young people for emotional distress. The ice cream vendor was confused and shaken. He didn't want exposure, didn't want lawsuits. He just wanted to continue his simple life, selling his ice cream to ensure his wife's treatment. The idea of becoming an instant celebrity deeply frightened him. It was at this moment that his phone rang again. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" answered Mr. Anthony with a tired voice. "Mr. Anthony, this is Charles, assistant to Mrs. Helen Montgomery. She would like to speak with you personally, if possible." Helen Montgomery. The name meant nothing to him. Yes, the lady who bought an ice cream from you yesterday after the incident. Oh yes, the kind lady. Mr. Anthony remembered the elegant woman who had helped him. But why does she want to talk to me? She prefers to explain in person. May we pick you up at your home tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Mr. Anthony hesitated. He didn't like altering his routine, and tomorrow would be a normal workday with his cart. "Mr. Anthony," continued Charles, sensing the hesitation, "I believe it would be in your interest to hear what Mrs. Helen has to say. She may be able to help you with the current situation." After some reflection, the ice cream vendor agreed. Perhaps that lady could really advise him on how to deal with all this unexpected exposure. The following morning, at precisely 10 a.m., a black Mercedes parked in front of the modest building where Mr. Anthony lived. Charles, impeccably dressed, rang the intercom. "Good morning, Mr. Anthony. The car is waiting for you." Mr. Anthony came down, wearing his best shirt, a bit faded but well ironed, and dress pants that he kept for special occasions. Upon entering the luxurious vehicle, he immediately felt out of place. "Where are we going?" he asked as the car glided smoothly through the streets of New York. "To Mrs. Helen's residence in Beverly Hills," replied Charles, looking at him through the rearview mirror. The ice cream vendor's eyes widened. Beverly Hills was one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city. Who was this Helen, really? After almost an hour's drive, the car finally crossed the gates of an imposing mansion with extensive gardens and impressive modern architecture. Mr. Anthony was increasingly nervous. Upon entering the house, he was led to a spacious living room with a view of the gardens. Helen was waiting for him, dressed elegantly but simply seated on a sofa. "Mr. Anthony, what a pleasure to receive you in my home," she said, rising to greet him. "Please sit down. Would you like some coffee?" "Yes, thank you," he replied, still trying to process the opulence around him. After a maid served coffee, in fine porcelain cups, Helen got straight to the point. "Mr. Anthony, I suppose you're confused about who I am and why I called you here. My full name is Helen Montgomery. I am the founder and president of the Montgomery Group of Communication and Technology." The ice cream vendor finally made the connection. The Montgomery Group was one of the largest media conglomerates in the country, owner of TV stations, newspapers, magazines, and digital platforms. "I was in the square on Sunday and witnessed the entire unfortunate scene involving you and those young people," continued Helen. "What they did is unforgivable, and I want to help you obtain justice." "Justice?" Mr. Anthony seemed confused. "I don't want to create more problems, ma'am. I just want them to forget about me and let me work in peace." Helen smiled gently. "I understand your position, but I'm afraid it's too late for that. The video has already gone viral, and your story is touching millions of people." She paused. Mr. Anthony, I know about your wife. The ice cream vendor lowered his eyes. Then, you know I lied to you. Helen didn't die. She has Alzheimer's. She's been in a nursing home for 3 years. Why did you lie about that? Mr. Anthony sighed. It's easier to say she's gone than to explain that the woman I knew, whom I loved for more than 40 years, is alive, but no longer recognizes me, no longer recognizes herself. His eyes filled with tears. I visit her every day after work. I bring her ice cream. It was what she loved most. Helen felt a lump in her throat. There was something about the dignity of this simple man that deeply moved her. Mr. Anthony, I came from a very poor family. My father was a street vendor. Like you, he sold candy on buses in Chicago to support me and my 4 siblings. She paused, recalling painful memories. I know what it's like to be humiliated for having less. I know what it's like to see someone you love work to exhaustion, just to survive. The ice cream vendor looked at her with renewed interest. He would never have imagined that this clearly powerful woman had come from such humble origins. That's why I can't stand by, continued Helen. I want to propose something to you, something that can change your life and at the same time teach a lesson to these privileged young people. What do you have in mind? Helen smiled. An ice cream parlor, not a cart but a complete modern store in the best spot on 5th Avenue. With your name, your recipes, your story. Mr. Anthony's eyes widened in disbelief. But that would cost a fortune. And I don't have experience in managing a business of that size. The investment is on me, replied Helen simply. As for the administration, we'll have qualified people to help you. You will be the master ice cream maker, the face and heart of the business. Why would you do this for me? He asked, still suspicious. Partially because I believe it's the right thing to do, and partially, she hesitated, because I want to show those young people that the person they chose to humiliate deserves more respect than all of them put together. Mr. Anthony was silent for a few moments, pondering the proposal. And if I refuse? Then I will respect your decision, replied Helen. But think about it, Mr. Anthony. Think about what you could do with a larger, stable income, the kind of care you could provide for your wife. The ice cream vendor nodded slowly. I need time to think. Of course. Take all the time you need. Helen handed him a card. This is my personal number. When you have an answer, speak directly to me. Meanwhile, far away, the 4 young people responsible for the humiliation were facing the consequences of their actions. The video had become a national scandal, with reports on all television channels and headlines in major newspapers. Henry Williams was locked in his luxury apartment in Manhattan, ignoring the dozens of hate messages he received every minute. His father, August, had cancelled his credit card and threatened to disinherit him if he didn't fix the situation. Williams' construction was losing important contracts due to the association with his son's name. Marianne Turner, who had her career as a digital influencer as her main source of income, saw her number of followers drop dramatically. Brands that sponsored her terminated contracts, citing ethical conduct clauses. Her parents, although millionaires, were strict about their daughter's financial independence and made it clear that she would have to solve her own problems. Luke Mitchell faced the fury of his father, Senator Paul Mitchell, who saw his chances of re-election compromised by his son's behavior. The family had hired a team of press advisors to try to minimize the damage, but voting intention polls already showed a significant drop. Tyler Adams, perhaps the most sensible of the group, was the first to realize the gravity of the situation. Without telling his friends, he contacted his father's hospital's public relations team, asking for help in locating Mr. Anthony and offering a formal apology. That night, while the young people faced the turmoil their actions had unleashed, Mr. Anthony was visiting Mrs. Helen at the nursing home, as he did every day. Sitting beside his wife's bed, he told her about his day, even knowing that she probably didn't understand his words. You know, Helen, something very strange happened today, he said, holding his wife's hand. A very rich woman, one of those who appear in magazines, wants to open an ice cream parlor with my name. She says she wants to help me. He paused, observing the impassive face of the woman he loved. What do you think I should do?" Mrs. Helen, as usual, did not respond. Her gaze remained vague, lost in a world only she could see. But for a brief moment her eyes seemed to focus on her husband, and her lips curved into a slight smile. For Mr. Anthony, that was answer enough. Upon arriving home, he took the card Helen had given him and dialed the number. "Mrs. Helen, this is Anthony. About your proposal. I accept." On the other end of the line, Helen smiled. "Excellent, Mr. Anthony. We'll start tomorrow." The next morning, as Helen and Mr. Anthony began planning the new ice cream parlor, the four young people simultaneously received a message on their cell phones. It was a video. In it appeared Helen Montgomery, one of the most powerful and influential women in the country, sitting in her office looking directly at the camera. "My name is Helen Montgomery, and I am recording this video especially for you, Henry Williams, Marianne Turner, Luke Mitchell, and Tyler Adams." The mention of their full names made the four freeze. "I witnessed what you did to Mr. Anthony Ferguson on Sunday. I saw the cruelty, the lack of empathy, the disrespect toward an honest worker who, at 68 years old, continues working to pay for his sick wife's treatment." Helen paused, her penetrating gaze seeming to reach each of them through the screen. "Normally, I wouldn't get involved in matters like this, but there's something about Mr. Anthony's dignity that deeply touched me. Perhaps it's because, like him, I come from humble origins and know the value of honest work." She leaned slightly forward. "I am contacting you to inform you that, from today, I am taking Mr. Anthony under my protection. I am investing in opening an ice cream parlor with his name on Fifth Avenue, and I want to personally invite you to the inauguration, which will take place in 3 weeks." The young people looked at each other, confused. Why would she invite them? "You have 2 options," continued Helen, as if she could hear the unasked question. "You can ignore this invitation and continue living your privileged lives trying to forget what you did. Or you can attend, personally apologize to Mr. Anthony, and perhaps learn something about humility and respect. The choice is yours." The video ended with a friendly smile, but Helen's eyes conveyed a clear message. This wasn't just an invitation, it was a test. In the weeks that followed, Mr. Anthony's transformation was remarkable. With Helen's financial and strategic support, he personally selected every detail of the new ice cream parlor. The rented space on Fifth Avenue, one of the most valued commercial spots in New York, was completely renovated. The walls were painted with vibrant colors, reflecting the fruits used in the ice creams. In the center of the store, a mural told Mr. Anthony's story, from his days as a teacher to the incident that had changed his life. Helen insisted that the name of the establishment be chosen by the ice cream vendor himself. After much reflection, he decided, Sweet Lesson, the Professor's Artisanal Ice Cream. The name was a reference both to his previous career and to a lesson about respect that was now spreading across the country. Meanwhile, the lives of the 4 young people had become a nightmare. Henry Williams, after a heated argument with his father, had been forced to start an internship at the family's construction company, working directly with the laborers at construction sites as a way to learn the value of hard work. Marianne Turner, without the advertising contracts that previously supported her lifestyle, had to sell some of her designer bags and clothes to keep up with bills. Luke Mitchell was removed from the private college where he studied and transferred to a public university where his last name wouldn't guarantee him special treatment. Tyler Adams, meanwhile, had voluntarily started working at a public hospital in the outskirts as a form of redemption. The 4 friends, once inseparable, now barely spoke to each other. The public humiliation and the consequences of their actions had created a rift in the group that seemed impossible to repair. The night before the ice cream parlor's inauguration, Helen made a point of personally picking up Mr. Anthony to show him how the finished space looked. When the lights came on and he saw the completed ice cream parlor for the first time, with his name on the illuminated facade, silent tears ran down his wrinkled face. Everything is perfect, Mrs. Helen. I don't know how to thank you. Seeing your reaction is thanks enough, Mr. Anthony. She smiled, genuinely happy to be able to provide that moment. Oh, and I have one more surprise for you. Helen led him to a room at the back of the ice cream parlor, equipped with a comfortable hospital bed, state-of-the-art medical equipment, and a uniformed nurse. "What is this?" asked Mr. Anthony, confused. "This is Mary, a nurse specialized in care for patients with Alzheimer's," explained Helen. "And this space was designed so that Mrs. Helen can stay here during the day while you work. At night, Mary will accompany her to your home if you prefer, or she can remain here. It all depends on what's best for you two." Mr. Anthony was speechless. The possibility of having his wife nearby, being cared for by qualified professionals while he worked, was more than he had ever dared to dream. "Why?" he finally managed to ask, his voice choked with emotion. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Helen looked deeply into the ice cream vendor's eyes. "Because I believe in justice, Mr. Anthony. Not the justice of courts or social media, but real justice, which recognizes people's value for who they are, not for what they possess or appear to be." She paused, remembering her own past. "My father died without ever seeing the success I built. He worked as a street vendor until his last day, always with dignity, always with honor." Her eyes moistened slightly. "When I saw those young people humiliating you, I saw my father being humiliated again, and I decided that this time the story would have a different ending." Mr. Anthony, moved by an impulse, hugged Helen. It was a simple embrace, without words, but one that carried all the gratitude he felt. The following day, the inauguration of the Sweet Lesson ice cream parlor was a media event. Journalists from across the country attended, attracted both by Mr. Anthony's moving story and by the presence of the powerful Helen Montgomery. Former students of the teacher came from far away to honor their old mentor. Some brought old school class photos, where a younger Anthony smiled among dozens of students. Mrs. Helen was present in her wheelchair, carefully assisted by Mary. Although her eyes remained mostly vacant, occasionally she smiled when someone approached, as if somewhere, deep in her fragmented mind, she knew that this was a special day. The time of the inauguration approached, and the crowd waited anxiously. Photographers positioned their cameras while reporters adjusted microphones. Helen and Mr. Anthony were near the entrance, ready to cut the inaugural ribbon, when a murmur in the crowd caught everyone's attention. Henry, Marianne, Luke, and Tyler had arrived. The four young people, visibly uncomfortable with the attention they were receiving, walked slowly toward the entrance of the ice cream parlor. The cameras immediately turned to them, capturing the moment that promised to be as viral as the original humiliation video. Silence fell over the environment when the young people stopped in front of Mr. Anthony. It was Tyler who stepped forward, seeming to be the spokesperson for the group. "Mr. Anthony," he began, his voice slightly trembling, "we came here today to apologize for what we did. It was unforgivable, cruel, and completely unjustifiable." He paused, searching for the right words. "We don't expect your forgiveness, but we wanted you to know that we are genuinely sorry and that we've learned a lesson we'll never forget." The other three nodded in silence, eyes down, avoiding direct eye contact with the ice cream vendor. Mr. Anthony observed the young people for a long moment. He saw in their faces the weight of shame, public exposure, the consequences of their actions. As a teacher for so many years, he recognized that look. It was the look of those who finally understood the impact of their actions. "I accept your apologies," he finally said, with the calm voice he used in his classes. "And I want you to know that I hold no grudge. In life, we all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them and grow as human beings." The young people seemed surprised by the reaction. They expected at minimum a public reprimand, perhaps even a refusal to accept them at the inauguration. "You forgive us, just like that?" asked Marianne, incredulous. Mr. Anthony smiled slightly. "Forgiveness is never about deserving, young lady. It's about liberating. Liberating both who forgives and who is forgiven." He looked at each of them. "As a teacher, I always believed that everyone deserves a second chance. You are no exception." Helen, observing the scene, felt a mixture of admiration and surprise. The capacity for forgiveness of this man was something rare, especially after everything he had been through. "Well, since you're here," continued Mr. Anthony, surprising. "Everyone, why don't you come in and try my ice cream on the house?" The photographers fired their flashes, capturing the moment when the four young people, visibly moved, entered the ice cream parlor side by side with the man they had humiliated weeks before. The image was powerful. It wasn't just about reconciliation, but about the true lesson that Sweet Lesson represented. The inauguration was a resounding success. The lines to try Mr. Anthony's artisanal ice cream extended for blocks. Celebrities appeared, attracted by the media coverage, and made a point of being photographed with the friendly ice cream vendor. Social media exploded with the hashtag #SweetLessonMrAnthony, which soon became one of the most commented topics in the country. But perhaps the most touching moment occurred when, amid the confusion of the inauguration, Mrs. Helen, who rarely showed any sign of awareness, looked at her husband serving ice cream behind the counter and said with surprising clarity, "Anthony, you did it. You finally opened our ice cream parlor." It was just one sentence, a brief moment of lucidity amid the fog of Alzheimer's, but for Mr. Anthony, it was as if the sun had broken through after decades of rain. Helen remembered. Somewhere, deep in her mind, she remembered the dream they had shared since they were young, to open an ice cream parlor together. Helen, who was observing the scene from a distance, saw when Mr. Anthony interrupted what he was doing, went around the counter and hugged his wife, crying silently. Not fully understanding what had happened, she approached. "Is everything all right? Mr. Anthony?" He looked at her, his eyes shining with joy through his tears. Helen remembered. She remembered our dream. His voice was choked with emotion. "When we were young, we always talked about opening an ice cream parlor after we retired. It would be called Sweet Dream. It was our plan for our old age." Helen felt her own eyes fill with tears. Without knowing, she had helped to realize not just a more dignified means of livelihood for the ice cream vendor, but a lifelong dream. "We can change the name to Sweet Dream, if you prefer," she offered. Mr. Anthony shook his head. "No, Sweet Lesson is perfect, because that's what we've all learned, isn't it? A lesson about respect, dignity, and now about dreams that come true even in the most unexpected moments." After the inauguration, the lives of everyone involved changed drastically. The Sweet Lesson ice cream parlor became a national phenomenon. Tourists made a point of visiting the establishment when passing through New York, not just to try the delicious artisanal ice cream, but to meet the man whose story had moved the country. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Mr. Anthony hired a team of employees, many of them young people, from underprivileged neighborhoods looking for their first job. As a former teacher, he made a point of investing time personally training each of them, not just in ice cream making techniques, but also in basic mathematics, customer service, and entrepreneurship. For many of these young people, working at Sweet Lesson was more than a job. It was a school of life. Mrs. Helen began to attend the special room at the back of the ice cream parlor daily. Although her moments of lucidity were rare, the routine and cheerful environment seemed to do her good. Occasionally, an older customer would recognize in her the English teacher she had been before the disease, and this always generated touching stories that Mr. Anthony treasured. Helen Montgomery, in turn, discovered a new facet of herself through this experience. What had begun as an act of personal justice had transformed into a larger project. Inspired by the success of Sweet Lesson, she created a foundation dedicated to supporting elderly micro-entrepreneurs across the United States, offering not just capital, but mentoring and structural support so they could develop dignified businesses in their golden years. And what about the four young protagonists of the humiliation that triggered this entire story? Henry Williams, after months working as a laborer at his father's construction sites, discovered an unexpected passion for practical engineering. He abandoned business administration and transferred to civil engineering, determined to revolutionize the family construction company with more sustainable and socially responsible projects. Occasionally, he visited Sweet Lesson and talked at length with Mr. Anthony about mathematics applied to engineering. Marianne Turner reinvented her career as a digital influencer, Instead of focusing on luxury, fashion, and lifestyle, she began to use her social media to highlight stories of ordinary American workers, showing the dignity and importance of professions often rendered invisible by society. Her new direction attracted a different audience, but surprisingly larger and more engaged than the previous one. Luke Mitchell, inspired by Mr. Anthony's capacity for forgiveness, decided to specialize in labor law and human rights, areas he had previously despised. His goal was to use his privileges and knowledge to defend those who had no voice in the judicial system. To the surprise of his traditionally conservative family, he began volunteering at an NGO that offered free legal assistance to low-income workers. Tyler Adams, perhaps the most deeply transformed of the group, abandoned the idea of pursuing a medical career in elite hospitals. Instead, he decided to specialize in geriatrics, inspired by Mrs. Helen's case. He began dividing his time between studies and volunteer work in nursing homes for low-income elderly, where he offered not just medical care but companionship and respect that many there rarely received. The four young people, once united by arrogance and disrespect, now maintained a different friendship, based on a shared purpose of reparation and personal growth. 1 year after the inauguration of Sweet Lesson, a special celebration was organized. The ice cream parlor had become a national phenomenon, with features in international magazines and even franchise proposals in other cities. Helen had refused all expansion offers, insisting that the magic of the place was precisely in its singularity and in the constant presence of Mr. Anthony. For the anniversary party, all the characters in this story gathered. Helen, Mr. Anthony, and Mrs. Helen, who was having one of her rare good days. The four now transformed young people, former students of the teacher, employees of the ice cream parlor, and even celebrities who had become regular customers. In an emotional moment of the celebration, Helen asked to speak. "A year ago, I witnessed an act of cruelty that made me act on impulse, moved by indignation," she began. "But what started as an attempt to correct an injustice has transformed into one of the most enriching experiences of my life." She looked at Mr. Anthony with genuine affection. "This man has taught me more about dignity, forgiveness, and purpose than any business book or mentor I've ever had." She smiled. The Sweet Lesson is not just the name of this ice cream parlor. It's what we've all learned throughout this year. That it's never too late to start over. That forgiveness liberates both who forgives and who is forgiven. And that true wealth lies in the human connections we form. She raised her glass in a toast. "To Sweet Lesson and to the man who taught us all a lesson we'll never forget." Everyone applauded, moved. Mr. Anthony, visibly touched, stood up with the help of his cane, which he now used more for style than necessity, and took the microphone. "When those young people humiliated me in that square, I thought it was the worst day of my life," he said with his calm teacher's voice. "Today I understand it was the beginning of something extraordinary." He looked at the four young people with a paternal smile. "What you did was wrong, but what you did afterward, the way you transformed your lives, fills me with pride, as if you were my own students." He paused, looking at his wife. "Helen and I always dreamed of an ice cream parlor, but we never imagined it would become all this, a place that changed not just our lives but the lives of so many others." His voice choked slightly. "As a teacher, I always believed that each person has the potential to be better today than they were yesterday. This ice cream parlor is living proof of that." He raised his own glass. "To Sweet Lesson and to all of you who are part of this story." As everyone toasted, Helen observed the scene with a sense of fulfillment that she had rarely experienced. In her life of professional success, there were people of completely different backgrounds and social classes, united by a transformative experience that had begun with an act of cruelty but had transformed into something beautiful. The morning after the celebration, as Mr. Anthony prepared the first recipes of the day, he received an unexpected visit. It was Jack, one of his former students from his teaching days, now a middle-aged man. "Professor Anthony, I came from Seattle just to see you," said Jack, visibly moved. "When I saw your story on television, I knew I needed to come and thank you personally." "Thank me for what, my son?" asked Mr. Anthony, genuinely curious. "For saving my life." Jack had tears in his eyes. "Do you remember me?" I was that troubled. Boy in 8th grade in 1985. Mr. Anthony frowned, trying to recall. He had taught so many students over the years. You were the one who wanted to drop out of school to work in drug dealing? Exactly. Jack smiled through tears. You were the only teacher who didn't give up on me. Remember when you gave me private math lessons after hours without charging anything? When you got me that internship at the bank? Mr. Anthony nodded, the memories gradually returning. Well, you should know that changed my destiny. Today I am the manager of that same bank. I have 3 children in college. Jack paused, moved. And none of them will ever humiliate a worker, because I taught them the lesson you taught me, that a person's character is not in what they own, but in who they are. The ice cream vendor hugged his former student, deeply touched. It was for moments like this that he had dedicated his life to teaching, and it was for moments like this that he now dedicated his old age to this new mission, the ice cream parlor that had become much more than a business. It was a meeting point, a place of redemption, a space where life lessons were served along with artisanal ice cream. That same week, an independent documentary filmmaker approached Mr. Anthony with a proposal to tell his story in a film. The fee. Teacher ice cream vendor initially hesitated. He didn't consider himself special or worthy of such attention, but Helen convinced him that his journey could inspire many people. Your story is not just about humiliation and redemption, Mr. Anthony, she argued. It's about how small acts, both cruel and kind, can trigger profound transformations in people's lives. Convinced, he agreed to the documentary, with one condition, that part of the profits would be allocated to a scholarship fund for low-income young people interested in entrepreneurship. The documentary, titled The Ice Cream Vendor's Lesson, premiered 6 months later at an important film festival and won the Audience Award. In a particularly moving scene, the 4 young people who had humiliated Mr. Anthony spoke openly about how that event had changed their life perspectives and values. I was a monster of entitlement, confessed Marianne on screen. I thought my money and my last name gave me the right to treat people as objects, as entertainment. Seeing the dignity with which Mr. Anthony reacted, and especially how he forgave us afterward, completely destroyed my worldview. The documentary also explored Mr. Anthony's life story, his poor childhood in upstate New York, his struggle to become a teacher, the years dedicated to teaching in public schools in poor neighborhoods, his wife's Alzheimer's diagnosis, and his decision to sell ice cream to supplement his retirement. After the documentary's screening, the sweet lesson phenomenon gained international dimension. Foreign tourists made a point of visiting the ice cream parlor when passing through New York. Teachers from around the world wrote to Mr. Anthony, telling how his story had inspired classroom discussions about respect, dignity, and forgiveness. Helen, always attentive to opportunities, proposed a new project, transforming Sweet Lesson into a social business model that could be replicated, not as a traditional franchise aiming for profit, but as training centers in entrepreneurship for people in vulnerable situations, especially the elderly and underprivileged youth. Each Sweet Lesson would be not just an ice cream parlor, but a learning space where people like you could teach their skills and at the same time receive a dignified income, she explained to Mr. Anthony. The idea quickly gained strength. Universities became interested in participating in the project, offering academic support. Companies wanted to associate their brands with the initiative, proposing sponsorships. NGOs saw in the proposal an innovative model of social inclusion. In the midst of all this whirlwind of positive events, however, Mrs. Helen's health continued to slowly deteriorate. The moments of lucidity became increasingly rare, although they still happened occasionally, like small gifts that Mr. Anthony celebrated each time. One night after closing the ice cream parlor, he was sitting next to his wife in her special room. As he frequently did, he told her about the day, the interesting customers he had met, the business news, although he knew she probably didn't understand his words. It was a way to keep her connected to his life. You know, Helen, today a family from Japan came just to visit our ice cream parlor. Imagine that. They came from the other side of the world to taste our ice cream. He smiled, holding his wife's hand. The documentary is showing in several countries. People are learning our story. To his surprise, Helen turned her face toward him, her eyes suddenly focused. "You were always the best teacher, Anthony," she said with surprising clarity. "Now you're teaching the whole world." They were just 2 sentences, but enough to fill the ice cream vendor's eyes with tears. He hugged his wife, knowing that this moment of connection was precious and possibly brief. "We're doing this together, my love," he whispered, "as we've always done everything in life together." The next day, as Mr. Anthony prepared for the ice cream parlor's opening, he received an unexpected call. It was Charles, Helen's assistant. "Mr. Anthony, Mrs. Helen would like to meet you urgently at her office. May I pick you up in 15 minutes? Concerned about the serious tone and urgency of the request, the ice cream vendor asked his assistant to take care of opening the store and waited for Charles. During the journey to Helen's office, his mind was buzzing with concerns. Had something serious happened? Some problem with the business? Upon entering Helen's impressive office on the top floor of a skyscraper in the financial center of New York, he found her accompanied by a middle-aged man of serious appearance, wearing an impeccable suit. "Mr. Anthony, thank you for coming so quickly," said Helen, rising to greet him. "This is Dr. Richard Morris, one of the country's most respected neurologists, specialized in Alzheimer's." Mr. Anthony's heart raced. Why would Helen be meeting with an Alzheimer's specialist? "Dr. Morris watched the documentary and was intrigued by Mrs. Helen's case," explained Helen, "especially by the moments of lucidity she still presents, something unusual in advanced cases like hers." The doctor took the floor. "Mr. Anthony, with Mrs. Montgomery's permission, I examined your wife's entire medical history." He hesitated briefly. "There's something I need to discuss with you. I believe Mrs. Helen may have been incorrectly diagnosed." "What do you mean?" Mr. Anthony felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "Your wife's symptoms are compatible with a condition called normal pressure hydrocephalus, or NPH. It's a condition that is often confused with Alzheimer's or dementia, but that, unlike these, may be treatable in many cases." Mr. Anthony looked at Helen, who nodded in confirmation. "If the diagnosis is correct," continued the doctor, "there is a surgical procedure that can significantly improve her condition. It's not a complete cure, but many patients recover a substantial part of their cognitive functions." "Are you saying that my wife, that Helen, could improve?" Mr. Anthony's voice trembled with contained emotion. "There is that possibility, yes, but we would need to perform specific exams to confirm the diagnosis before discussing any procedure." Helen intervened. "I've already arranged everything, Mr. Anthony. If you authorize, Mrs. Helen can be transferred today to Dr. Morris's clinic, where she will undergo all necessary exams. All costs are covered by my foundation." Mr. Anthony felt tears freely flowing down his face. The possibility, however slim, of recovering Helen, of being able to talk again with the companion of his entire life, was almost too much to process. "Thank you," was all he could say in an emotional whisper. In the weeks that followed, as Mrs. Helen underwent a battery of sophisticated exams, Sweet Lesson continued its trajectory of success. The expansion project as a social business model was taking shape with the selection of the first participants, 10 elderly people and 15 underprivileged young people who would receive training in entrepreneurship and artisanal ice cream techniques. The 4 young people who had been the protagonists of the original Humiliation were now deeply involved in the project, each contributing in a unique way. Henry used his engineering knowledge to design accessible and sustainable spaces for the new units. Marianne used her communication skills to promote the initiative. Luke offered legal support, ensuring that all participants had their rights respected. And Tyler, with his ongoing medical training, developed a preventive health program for the elderly participants. It was a work of redemption for them, but it had transformed into much more, a true vocation. Finally, after almost a month of exams, Dr. Morris summoned Mr. Anthony and Helen for a decisive meeting. "The diagnosis is confirmed," he announced. "Mrs. Helen suffers from normal pressure hydrocephalus, not Alzheimer's. The good news is that she is an excellent candidate for the ventricular peritoneal shunt procedure, which can significantly improve her condition." "What are the risks?" asked Mr. Anthony, trying to contain the hope that threatened to completely overwhelm him. "As in any surgical procedure, there are risks, but in this specific case, the potential benefits considerably outweigh the risks. The doctor paused. "Mr. Anthony, I cannot promise a complete return to normalcy, but there is a real chance that your wife will recover a significant part of her cognitive functions and autonomy." After consulting Helen's family and reflecting deeply, Mr. Anthony authorized the procedure. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. On the day of the operation, Sweet Lesson closed its doors for the first time since the inauguration. All the employees, the 4 young people, Helen and dozens of regular customers, gathered in the hospital chapel in a chain of prayers for Mrs. Helen's recovery. The surgery lasted 4 hours. When Dr. Morris finally appeared in the waiting room, his face was serious, but his eyes revealed a gleam of professional satisfaction. "The surgery was a complete technical success," he announced. "Now we need to wait for recovery and observe how she will respond to the treatment. The first signs should appear in the coming weeks, but complete recovery, if it occurs, may take months." Mr. Anthony thanked the doctor and Helen emotionally, who had made all this possible. "Even if nothing changes, the simple fact of trying already means a lot to me," he said. "You've given me something I had lost: hope." The days that followed were ones of contained anxiety. Mrs. Helen was transferred to a private room in the best wing of the hospital, where she received constant visits from Mr. Anthony. He read to her, told her about the day at the ice cream parlor, showed her photos of the new flavors he had created. 2 weeks after the surgery, the first sign happened. While Mr. Anthony was showing photos of the new class of apprentices at Sweet Lesson, Mrs. Helen pointed to one of the images. "This girl looks like Sophia, my student from 1992, she said with surprising clarity. Mr. Anthony froze. Sophia had indeed been a student of Helen's in the early 1990s, when she was still teaching English. It was a specific, detailed memory, something that hadn't happened in years. In the days that followed, other positive signs appeared. Mrs. Helen began to form more complex sentences, to recognize people beyond Mr. Anthony, to ask questions about what had happened during her years of absence. Progress was slow, not linear, with better days and worse days, but the general trend was improvement. 1 month after the surgery, she was ready to be discharged from the hospital. Dr. Morris explained that she would continue to need regular medical monitoring and some therapies, but could return to a relatively normal life. "It's one of the most rewarding cases of my career," confessed the doctor. "Seeing someone literally return to life after years lost is what makes us believe in medicine." On the day Mrs. Helen finally visited the ice cream parlor, no longer as a patient confined to the special room at the back, but as a real customer, able to walk with the aid of a cane and converse with relative normality, the emotion was general. Employees, regular customers, and even journalists gathered to witness the moment. Seated at one of the tables decorated with old photos of Mr. Anthony with his students, Mrs. Helen tasted the papaya with passion fruit ice cream, her husband's favorite. "It's delicious, Anthony," she said, with a smile that lit up her aged face. "Exactly as your mother used to make." That simple phrase, that specific memory of a flavor tasted decades before, was the final proof that the miracle had happened. Helen was really back, not completely. Perhaps she never would be, but enough to resume her life, to reconnect with the world and with the husband who had never given up on her. That night, after closing the ice cream parlor, Mr. Anthony and Mrs. Helen sat on the balcony of the small apartment they now shared again. Helen had offered a larger, more comfortable house, but they had refused. They preferred the simplicity of the home they knew. "You know, Helen, sometimes I think I should thank those young people," reflected Mr. Anthony, looking at the stars. "Thank them for humiliating you?" she asked, surprised. "In a way, yes. If they hadn't done that, I would never have met Helen Montgomery. The ice cream parlor would never have existed. You might never have been correctly diagnosed." Mrs. Helen thought for a moment, her reasoning still slower than before, but perfectly lucid. "I understand what you're saying. It's strange how sometimes bad things pave the way for wonderful things." She held her husband's hand. "But the merit isn't theirs, Anthony, it's yours. It's your dignity that transformed an act of cruelty into something beautiful. It's your character that inspired Helen Montgomery, that touched so many people." Mr. Anthony smiled, moved. Having Helen back, hearing her quiet wisdom again, was a gift he never expected to receive. At that moment, his phone rang. It was Helen. "Mr. Anthony, I'm calling to give you extraordinary news. The documentary, The Ice Cream Vendor's Lesson, has just been nominated for the Oscar for Best Documentary." The old ice cream vendor could hardly believe it. A film about his simple life, about a humiliation transformed into redemption, competing for the world's biggest film award? It seemed surreal. "This means that you, Mrs. Helen, and the entire Sweet Lesson team are invited to the ceremony in Los Angeles," continued Helen, excited. "Get ready for the red carpet." After hanging up the phone and telling his wife the news, the two burst into hearty laughter. The idea of two simple elderly people, a former math teacher and a former English teacher, walking the same red carpet as the great Hollywood stars, was simply absurd and wonderful at the same time. "Life is really full of surprises, isn't it?" "Anthony," said Mrs. Helen, leaning on her husband's shoulder. "Yes, my love, and the greatest one was having you back," he replied, gently kissing her forehead. Meanwhile, on social media, the announcement of the Oscar nomination made the name Sweet Lesson return to worldwide trending topics. The four young people who had started it all with an act of cruelty posted a joint statement. "Almost 2 years. I guess we made a terrible mistake in humiliating a hard-working man for fun. Today that man is nominated for an Oscar, for a documentary about how his dignity changed our lives, and the lives of so many others. Mr. Anthony taught us that it's never too late to learn, never too late to change, never too late to start over. The sweet lesson we received from him is worth more than any degree or inheritance, and for that we will be eternally grateful." The message, shared millions of times in a few hours, perfectly symbolized the extraordinary journey that had begun with a humiliation in a New York square and now reached the doors of the world's biggest film celebration. A story of redemption, of second chances, of unshakable dignity in the face of cruelty. A story about how small acts can trigger profound transformations, a true, sweet lesson about human nature and our capacity for moral evolution. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. 3 months later, Los Angeles was preparing for Oscar night. Among the limousines of world-famous celebrities, one stood out not for its luxury, but for its unusual passengers. An elderly American couple, visibly dazzled and a bit uncomfortable, with so much attention. Mr. Anthony, wearing a rented tuxedo that Helen had insisted on paying for, helped Mrs. Helen, stunning in a simple but elegant navy blue dress, get out of the vehicle. Behind them came Helen Montgomery and the four young people, now an inseparable part of the Sweet Lesson story. Photographers from around the world fired flashes as the group walked the red carpet. Journalists jostled to get a few words from the protagonist of the documentary that had moved global audiences. "Mr. Anthony, how do you feel participating in the Oscars?" asked an American reporter. The old ice cream vendor smiled, a little shy. "I feel like I'm dreaming. A retired teacher who sells ice cream in New York, now here among so many stars. It's hard to believe. What's the biggest lesson you hope people take from your documentary?" questioned another journalist. Mr. Anthony thought for a moment before answering, "That respect and dignity are universal values, that each person, regardless of their age, profession, or origin, deserves to be treated with humanity, and that it's never too late to learn, change, and start over." Inside the prestigious Dolby Theatre, the tension was palpable when the moment arrived for the Best Documentary category. Mr. Anthony firmly held Mrs. Helen's hand, while Helen Montgomery, seated on the other side, smiled encouragingly. "And so the Oscar goes to," announced the celebrity in charge of opening the envelope, "The Ice Cream Vendor's Lesson from the United States." The audience erupted in applause. Cameras turned to the American group, capturing the expression of absolute surprise on Mr. Anthony's face. Helen leaned toward him. "Go, Mr. Anthony. This moment is yours." With slow but firm steps, the old ice cream vendor climbed onto the stage. At his side, the documentary's director received the golden statuette, but soon ceded the microphone to the true protagonist of the night. Before an audience composed of the world's biggest movie stars and broadcast live to millions of viewers, Mr. Anthony adjusted his glasses and spoke with the same calm voice he had used for decades in classrooms in the Bronx. "I never imagined that one day I would be here. I'm just a teacher who sells ice cream." He paused, moved. "This award is not mine. It belongs to all the invisible workers who, every day, face disrespect and prejudice with dignity. It belongs to my wife, Helen, who returned to me after years lost in the fog of Alzheimer's." His voice choked slightly. "It belongs to Helen Montgomery, who transformed an act of vengeance into a project of redemption. And surprisingly, it also belongs to those 4 young people who humiliated me. Because they proved that everyone can change, everyone can evolve, everyone can learn the sweetest lesson of all, that a person's true value lies in how they treat others, especially those who cannot offer them anything in return." The audience rose in an emotional ovation. Celebrities with million-dollar paychecks stood applauding a simple American ice cream vendor, whose simple but profound words touched something universal in everyone present. In the days that followed, Mr. Anthony's speech was translated into dozens of languages and shared countless times on social media. Educational programs in various countries began to use the documentary as a tool to discuss empathy, respect, and personal transformation. Sweet Lesson had completely transcended its origins, becoming a global cultural phenomenon. Back in the United States, life at the ice cream parlor returned to normal, or to the new normal that now included international tourists forming lines to meet the Oscar-winning ice cream vendor. The expansion project as a social business was gaining more and more strength, with more than 50 candidates for the next class of training in entrepreneurship and artisanal ice cream techniques. Mrs. Helen, increasingly recovered, took an active role in the business. With her experience as an English teacher, she created an adult literacy program that operated in the ice cream parlor space after business hours. Many of the employees who had not completed their formal education benefited from the night classes. The 4 young people, now graduated in their respective fields, dedicated a significant part of their time to the Sweet Lesson project. Each, in their own way, had found a purpose that transcended the privileges with which they had been born. The thoughtless act of cruelty they had committed had become the catalyst for profound maturation and a complete redefinition of values. Helen Montgomery, inspired by the success of the ice cream parlor and the documentary, significantly expanded her foundation supporting elderly entrepreneurs. The Sweet Lesson model was now being replicated in various American cities, always maintaining the fundamental principles: dignity in work, knowledge transmission between generations, and opportunities for people in vulnerable situations. On a sunny afternoon, almost 3 years after the original incident in the square, the ice cream parlor received a special visit. The Secretary of Education came personally to announce the creation of the Professor Anthony Award, designed to recognize educators who, even after retirement, continued to positively impact their communities. "You have become a national symbol of resilience, dignity, and commitment to education," said the Secretary, presenting Mr. Anthony with a commemorative plaque. "Your story has inspired an entire generation of teachers to see their work not just as a profession, but as a mission that transcends the walls of the classroom." The old ice cream vendor, visibly moved, thanked humbly. "A teacher never really retires," he replied. "They just change classrooms. Today, this ice cream parlor is my classroom, and each customer, each young apprentice, each person who hears our story is a potential student." That night, after the ice cream parlor closed, a small celebration was organized to commemorate the new award. Helen, the 4 young people, employees, former students, and friends gathered for a special toast. In the most touching moment of the night, Marianne, the former digital influencer, who had participated in the original humiliation, asked to speak. "When we entered that square 3 years ago, we were empty people," she began, her voice choked with emotion. "We had money, privileges, followers on social media, but we were completely empty inside. We chose the worst possible way to fill that emptiness, by humiliating someone we considered inferior." She looked directly at Mr. Anthony. What we didn't know was that that simple gentleman pushing an ice cream cart had more wealth inside him than all of us together would ever have. A wealth of character, of principles, of humanity. She smiled through tears. Mr. Anthony taught us the greatest lesson we could learn, that a person's true value is not in what they own, but in who they are. Henry, Luke, and Tyler nodded in silent agreement. Each of them had undergone a profound transformation, completely, redefining their values and life priorities. Mr. Anthony, seated next to Mrs. Helen, who tenderly held his hand, looked around. He saw himself surrounded by people whose lives he had touched in some way, former students who now had their own children, young apprentices from underprivileged backgrounds who found in the ice cream parlor an opportunity that society had denied them. The 4 young people who had humiliated him and now revered him as a mentor. Helen, the powerful businesswoman who had found a greater purpose through his story, and Helen, his lifelong companion, who had returned to him when all seemed lost. In an impulse, he stood up. "I would like to propose a toast," he said, raising his glass, "not to me, nor to the award, nor even to the ice cream parlor, but to the lesson that all of us have learned together, that it's never too late to start over, never too late to forgive, never too late to transform a mistake into something beautiful." Everyone raised their glasses in an emotional toast. "To sweet lesson," said Helen. "To sweet lesson," everyone responded in unison. Outside on the street, people passed by hurriedly, absorbed in their own lives. Some looked curiously at the illuminated ice cream parlor, where a diverse group celebrated something that seemed important. Few knew the complete story behind that establishment. Few understood how a simple humiliation video had triggered such a profound transformation in the lives of so many people. But for those who knew the story, Sweet Lesson was much more than an ice cream parlor. It was a testimony to the transformative power of dignity in the face of cruelty, of the human capacity for redemption, and of the eternal truth that small acts, both kind and cruel, can change destinies in ways we could never imagine possible. And that's how a story that began with rich young people humiliating an elderly ice cream vendor ended with an Oscar, a National Education Award, and most importantly, with lives forever transformed. Because the true sweet lesson wasn't in the delicious ice creams, but in the extraordinary journey that had transformed a humiliation into a legacy of hope and dignity. End of story. And you, what did you feel while following Mr. Anthony's journey? Do you believe that dignity can transform negative situations into opportunities for growth? Share your reflections in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the heart.